Good afternoon. Thank you all for coming here today. It's great to be with you all. My name is Eden Sung. I'm a 2019 grad of WashU Law and COO of the Legal Vocation Fellowship, which is a national mentoring program for early career Christian attorneys. I was in your shoes not too long ago wondering what I was going to do after graduation. We hope with this event here today you can see a greater picture of what you'll be capable of as attorneys. Whether you go into private practice as prosecutors or public defenders in the government, or into nonprofit work for better, more fair, and more equitable systems of justice, there's a lot of good you can do in the practice of law. We're grateful for our co-sponsors here today for their help in bringing this event to campus. The Wiedemann Center on the Economy, Government, and Public Policy, and the Public Interest Law and Policy Speaker Series at WashU Law. If you need CLE credit too, you can sign out outside. To introduce our speakers here today, we'll have to go back to 1987. In 1987, Ben Spencer was living in Texas, newly married to his wife Deborah, who's also here with us here today. And with his first child on the way, he found himself arrested for a crime that he didn't commit, the robbery and murder of a prominent white businessman in Dallas. What transpired next week was a series of events that led to Ben's conviction and life sentence, hasty police work, paid witnesses, and prosecutorial misconduct. Later efforts to correct these errors were ignored, but through it all, Ben maintained his innocence. Ben spent 34 years wrongly imprisoned before being released in 2021. In August of 2024, not too long ago, Ben was fully exonerated, his name cleared after spending more than half his life in prison. Ben has returned to work and is focused on reconnecting with his family. He takes every opportunity to share his story with the hope of inspiring others. Barbara Bradley Hagerty was part of bringing Ben's story to light. An award-winning journalist for NPR, writing also for The Atlantic, she decided to call up a friend who worked in innocence cases and asked, "What is the case that haunts you?" She was invited into Ben Spencer's story. She wrote about Ben, his path to justice, and examined the criminal justice system through several articles at the time of fighting to secure his release. As she says herself, reporting Ben's story became the most meaningful endeavor of her life. It eventually led to her book, Bringing Ben Home, A Murder, a Conviction, and the Fight to Redeem American Justice. I remember Barb telling me at the time she didn't know how this book would end when she began writing it, but we're honored to have both her and Ben here with us today. Before we begin, I want to read in Ben's own words how he prefaces his story. "I'm not sure where to begin with the details of this case, but I can assure you that wherever I start, that will be the truth. The proverbial problem for me has always been trying to figure out what's significant, what's insignificant. My fervent prayer is that I will not fail in my objective in pointing out the serious wrong that has been imposed on me, my family, and the family of the victim, Jeffrey Young. My prayer is that after reading about the details of this case in particular, that you can find it in your hearts to help come up with a solution to this problem of injustice. May God bless you richly and grant us favor in this request." I look forward to our conversation today with Benjamin Spencer, Barbara Bradley Hagerty, moderated by Professor John Inazu.
Well, thanks everyone for coming out. It's really great to be here. This is a great moment and a privilege to be with the two of you. The book is Bringing Ben Home. It's an extraordinary book. You don't have to believe me. John Grisham says, simply unforgettable. And it's extraordinary to me because Barb manages to weave together the story of Ben's life against the backdrop of a broken criminal justice system where this is not, sadly, just a one-off event, but there are so many other stories. And then Ben's person and character come through in this book in incredible ways. So being able to spend dinner with them last night brought a whole different level to the discussion that we'll have, and I'm really excited for you all to get a chance to hear from them, not only as sort of author and person, but also as human beings. So thank you for joining us. Ben, I wonder if you would start us off with sort of getting us into this story that became the saga of your life, that began those early days in 1987. What happened? Tell us about the events leading up to your arrest and what the experience was like.
Okay, on March 26, 1987, I had just dropped off lunch with my wife, Deborah, and headed back to the house. Well, before I headed back to the house, I was told that she had set me a doctor's appointment for 3:15 that day because I had been experiencing these migraine headaches. So I returned home, took a Tylenol, and laid down and just kind of went to sleep. Excuse me. But before arriving home, I was also stopped by a guy by the name of Charles Stewart, who had told me he needed someone to follow him to his girlfriend's job to drop her car off and give him a ride back home, and I agreed to do that. So I told him to come over to my house around 2:30. So I headed home and took a Tylenol, laid down, went to sleep with the radio playing, music, on, and went to sleep. And around about 2:30, well, I was awakened by someone beating on the front door, and I woke up and I saw that it was 2:30, so I assumed it was this guy, Charles Stewart. So I get up, and as I'm headed toward the front door of the house, I could see out the front window that there's police cars out in front of my house. So I open the door, and there's police on the porch, and I'm like, may I help you? And they're like, do you have any ID? So I hand him my ID. He tell me to turn around, face the wall. I'm under arrest. I said, under arrest for what? He said, I'll tell you in a minute. So long story short, they searched me, put handcuffs on me, escort me to the car, put me in the back seat. He gets in the front seat and looks over the back of the seat and said, you hear about the white guy they found on the street Sunday night? I said, I heard that they found someone on the street Sunday night. He said, well, that's what you're under arrest for, his murder. I said, well, you have the wrong guy. I had nothing to do with that. I don't know anything about that offense. So he said, well, some of your neighbors on the night of the offense claimed that they saw you walking around showing off this jam box with a TV on it. I said, a jam box with a TV on it? He said, yeah. I said, man, dope fiends do stuff like that. I said, I don't do drugs. I said, in fact, I don't do any walking. I said, I have 2 cars. Both my cars have systems in it. And I have a system in my house. What am I going to do with a jam box? He said, I don't know. But that's what your neighbors claim. Do you mind if we search your house? I said, no, I need you to sign this waiver of consent. I signed the waiver of consent. They searched the house, find a portable TV radio, and they said, oh, we got you. I said, I don't know what you're looking for, but I can assure you that's not it. So upon getting a better description of what they were looking for and also finding this TV was marked with my mother's name and driver license number, they said, well, we still got to take you downtown for questioning. So we head downtown where I was questioning, and I began to lay out that day, that Sunday, what I had done from morning to night. And he began to tell me about one of my neighbors saying that they saw my car parked in front of this lady's house named Miss Gladys. I said, sure, my car was there. I said, I was next door talking to this young lady that stayed next door. So yes, my car was there. And so, and I also told them about where I worked at the time, because my thing is they're trying to say that I robbed someone for something that's, you probably couldn't get $20 to $30 on the street for it. And so I had told them I had a job. And so they went and had an investigator speak to the young lady that I was with the night of the offense, as well as send someone to my job. And when he returned, he said, well, the young lady said you're not her boyfriend. She don't have a boyfriend. I said, I never told you I was her boyfriend. I told you I was with her. He said, well, she says she don't know you. I said, she has to know me. I was with her that night. And the people on your job say they've never heard of you. I said, well, they have to have heard of me. That's where I work. Well, they say they've never heard of you. So I was arrested and arraigned and charged with capital murder of Jeffrey Young.
And how there were lots of processes and interviews and then some trials along the way. Was there a point at which because initially you're just thinking this has to be a huge mistake. Obviously I didn't do this. Was there a point where it flipped for you and you realized, oh, this is not going well. They're not going to let go of me?
I would say no, because I always believed that the truth would prevail. Upon the day of my arrest, I truly believed that, I fully cooperated with the understanding that, hey, if I talk to them, the truth is, they're going to realize that I'm telling the truth and I'm going to be set free. And I was questioned a second time and maybe it's kind of set in, but at the same time, I'm still thinking that as an investigator, this investigator has a job to perform, and I'm under understanding that he's going to perform his job, which is investigate this case. So upon the second interview or interrogation where this investigator brings me out, takes me out of a cell and have me brought downstairs to him, as soon as I walk in the room, the first words out of his mouth was, "Did Van Mitchell Spencer commit this offense?" At this point in time, I had never heard of anyone by the name of Van Mitchell Spencer. He's no relation to me. I had never heard of him. But it became clear to me that he was trying to coerce me into saying that this guy, Van Mitchell Spencer, had committed the offense. And I encouraged him to continue his investigation, and that the evidence should lead you to the person who committed the offense. And his exact words to me was, "Mr. Spencer, why should I investigate? I have you as a suspect. As far as I'm concerned, you're guilty." And I became kind of a little upset at that time, because here it is, I'm telling you the truth and you don't want to believe what I'm telling you. So I tell him, "Well, okay, when you decide to investigate this case and y'all find out the truth and y'all let me go, y'all going to pay me for the time and trouble that y'all put me through." And again, he said, "Well, Mr. Spencer, if I was you, I wouldn't worry about suing anybody. Come on, person, see to it, you get convicted." But of course, I'm still naive enough to believe that he's going to investigate this case, and he's going to find this evidence, and it's going to convince him that I'm innocent, and I'm going to go home. That never happened. I was tried in October of 1987 of murder, and was convicted by a jury of murder and sentenced to a non-aggravated 35-year sentence.
I'll say that, you know, if you get a chance to read the book, this book is full of the details leading up to the conviction that include, I mean, the kinds of things that you read about in law school and you think, can this really happen? Can they really go to the jailhouse informant who just makes it up and you leverage that testimony? Yes. Can they rely on unbelievable eyewitness testimony as key to their case? Yes, it happens. And then a 35-year sentence. Barb, how did you get involved in this case?
Well, you didn't mention, I mean, and Ben's case is just, it's so common. 3,600 people have been wrongly convicted since 1989 that we know about, and that's probably a fraction. I got involved because I was looking for a story for NPR, for The Atlantic, and as Eden mentioned, I called up my favorite source, Jim McCluskey. He's the most important person you've probably never heard of. He basically launched the Innocence Movement with his group called Centurion Ministries. He had been a source of mine when I was at NPR covering the Justice Department. And so I called him up and I said, "Jim, what's the case that haunts you?" And Jim said, "Well, that's easy, Ben Spencer's case." And the reason it was easy is because Ben, he had taken on Ben's case. Now, Jim started Centurion Ministries. He started reinvestigating dubious convictions back in 1983. He took on Ben's case in 2001 after Ben had been in prison, been incarcerated for about 14 years, reinvestigated it, found enough evidence to show that Ben could not, the witnesses were lying, there was probably a more viable suspect, got all this evidence in front of a judge in Dallas, and the judge ruled he was actually innocent. But Ben didn't get out. We'll get into that. Ben was still in prison. Ben was still in prison in 2017 when I called up Jim. So Ben had been in prison for 30 years, even though he had been declared innocent. And for me, the question was, what good is innocence? If a judge declares you innocent and you're still in prison for life, it doesn't matter. Can you get out of prison if there's no DNA? Why is it so easy to convict an innocent person and almost impossible to get him out? So that was a question that haunted me, and that is why I ended up getting involved in the case.
And before your involvement, there's actually, I mean, as is often the case, there are complicated procedural and trial aspects of this. One of them was a court that initially vacates the conviction, and at that point, the prosecutor offers you a deal, right? And says you can plea out and get out early. And and let's talk about that.
So what John has done, he's gone back to 1987. So after I had been sentenced to 35 years non-aggravated, one of the attorneys who was representing me found that the state was concealing the fact that one of their witnesses who claimed that she didn't know anything about a reward, wasn't interested in a reward, that she had actually called Crime Stoppers as opposed to the investigator. So he filed a motion for a new trial. The judge granted the motion for a new trial. The state took the case and had it, took it before another grand jury and came up with the indictment of aggravated robbery. And before that trial began, 3 days prior to that trial beginning, I was approached by my attorney his name was Frank Jackson. He approached me and told me that the state was willing to offer me a plea bargain of 20 years non-aggravated, which means I could have did something like 2 years and been eligible for parole. And of course, I'm innocent, so I told him I couldn't take any time for something I didn't do. And he said, well, Ben, you should think about it. He said, because if you take this to trial and the state get a conviction, they're going to likely ask for a life sentence and they're likely to get it. And so I'm like, well, I don't care what they're likely to get. I didn't commit this offense, and I'm not going to take any time for it. And he said, well, you should really think about it, because a life sentence, you'll be in prison for a long time. I said, look, I can't take any time for something I didn't do. So he suggested I talk to my wife and my mother about it. And I went back to my cell that night, and I called my wife and called my mother, and they're both on the phone, and I explained to them what the attorney had explained to me. And they was like, you know, we know you didn't do it, but we just want you to come home. We think you should take the plea bargain. I said, and I'm like, I can't take a plea bargain for something I didn't do. And they was like, well, we understand that you didn't do it, but we just want you to come home, you know. And so I began to explain to them the process of accepting a plea bargain. It's not just where you accept what they're offering you. You also have to give a statement and write out an affidavit of the events that supposedly took place. So I would have had to write a lie in an affidavit saying I committed this offense, that I did this, and I did that. And I told them that's something I couldn't do. And so, and I also began to explain to them what being out on parole would mean for me. I have an X on my back, and I may be a target when they can't find a viable suspect for the next offense. I may be that suspect as well. And I believe that I would be setting a cycle of getting arrested for crimes I didn't commit. And both my mother and wife at that time said, well, we didn't think about it that way. And so they both encouraged me to do what I believe was right to do, and that's what I did. I took it to trial a second time, hoping and praying that the truth would prevail again. And again, a jury ignored the truth and believed the lie, and I was convicted and sentenced to life.
And then there are a lot of years between that moment and when Barb reaches out. So tell us about some of were there moments where you glimpsed hope or possibility, or were there setbacks that felt almost too hard to overcome in those intervening years?
A little bit of both. After I was convicted the second time, that life sentence, I really couldn't see the end of 20 years, and I really wanted to die literally. I actually contemplated about taking my own life at that time. And good thing I didn't do that for various reasons, but I believe that the truth would prevail. And I'll just kind of fast forward to when I went to prison. I mean, I didn't enjoy being incarcerated, but at the same time, the treatment that I received was different than a lot of inmates because of the way I carried myself, the way I conduct myself. So I had respect not only with the inmates, but with the guards as well. So it kind of made the situation a little bearable. But to answer your question, I had heard of this organization, Centurion Ministries, long before I went to prison, but never had a contact address. And so while I'm in prison, I go to church with this guy by the name of James Rails, and we used to talk about our respective cases together. And so one Sunday we're talking after church, and he was like, man, I have an address of this organization. I want you to write them. And I said, okay. He said, I've wrote them, but they couldn't help me because I don't have enough time. And they look for cases where a person has a lot of time. You have a lot of time to do. So I recommend that you write them. So I wrote them December, I believe, 1989. And although I had received a response from one or two of the places or organizations I had written, out of the hundreds of places I had written, Centurion was consistent in responding to my letters. And when the first initial letter, they began to tell me that they was glad that I wrote them. They went on to explain that the fact that they were writing me back was not an indication that they would take my case or be able to help me, but they encouraged me to continue writing anyone and everyone that I could in seeking aid in my case, because they received thousands of requests from different inmates claiming innocence within a month, you know, so that's a lot of people. So that kind of gave me some hope, but at the same time, kind of left me hopeless as well, because I didn't think they'd ever get around to my case. They got around to my case in 2000. Jim McCluskey came down, visited me, told me he was taking my case and that they wouldn't leave me until they walked me out. And Jim McCluskey held true to that. So we filed a writ in 2004, a writ of habeas corpus in 2004. A judge was elected in 2006, I believe, at the end of 2006. And in the beginning of 2007, he held a hearing on this writ of habeas corpus. So this hearing lasted about 4 days. And after the outset, I think he was trying to get the DA's office on board to agree with what we had presented, which the district attorney's office was opposed to do. So they fought us all the way. And so he sent it off to the Court of Criminal Appeals in 2008 after making a recommendation that I be granted relief on actual innocence. The Court of Criminal Appeals in Texas sat on it for 3 years, and 3 years later, April of 2011, they denied the relief that he said I should receive. So I found myself back in the situation I was in prior to the writ hearing. So at that time, I was kind of hopeful and hopeless at the same time, because I still believed that the truth would prevail, although it seemed like we had a large hurdle to climb. So at that time, there are several things took place. One, an investigator by the name of Darrell Parker wrote me and told me that he used to be a police officer. He was an ex-Marine, and that now he was a private investigator. And he told me he had heard of my case, and he believed that my case deserved to be reinvestigated, and he was willing to do so pro bono. Shortly after that, I think that's when Barb came on the scene and had an interest in writing a story about this case. And then another attorney got on board as well, Gary Udishin. So it seemed like this case just began to flourish again, you know, to where it brought this hope that I felt I had lost, had came back, so yeah.
Barb, when you came in, how dire did it feel, and what were your initial experiences writing the first article and navigating the system?
Well, what's incredible about investigating a case that's 30 years old is you think that it's hopeless. You think that there's no evidence to be found, that everyone will forget. You know, witnesses will die, memories will fade, all this other stuff. But there's a flip side to that, and that is that time is not only the kind of enemy of truth, it's also the friend of truth, because alliances change, right? People, the people's conscience eats away at them. They don't have a reason to lie anymore, right? And so when Daryl and I went around, it felt hopeless, because it did feel helpless, because we needed new evidence. Jim McCluskey had brought forth all this evidence to a judge, but that evidence couldn't be used anymore. I mean, it was done, right? So we needed new evidence to get him into court again, or to persuade a district attorney to look at his case. And so Daryl and I we went around and we tried to find, there were 4 witnesses, all circumstantial, no physical evidence against Ben, nothing connecting him to the crime, no fingerprints, well, there wasn't DNA technology at that point, but there's nothing to connect him. So what do? We try to find the witnesses. One of them had died. The star witness, Gladys Oliver, would not talk to us. She was really the ringleader. We suspected that she had received a large reward. That was the thing that was motivating the witnesses, we think. The victim was the son of one of Ross Perot's top executives. You guys don't, how many people were alive in the late 1980s? Well, Ross Perot ran for president twice. This was right before he ran for president the first time. He was a big man on campus. He was a big guy in Dallas. And he wanted justice for his employee's son. And so he offered a $25,000 reward, which was a lot of money back then in 1987 in the poor neighborhood of West Dallas. So these witnesses came forward. Gladys Oliver, another young man who died during a kind of altercation over a drug deal, and then another guy named Jimmy Cotton, and then the jailhouse informant, Danny Edwards, who said that Ben confessed to him. So basically, we're looking for those people. Gladys said no. We eventually found Jimmy Cotton, and this is one of the surprising things that happens. It's why you never give up hope. We went and we finally found him. It took a few tries, different places, knocked on the door. A woman said, "Who is it?" Daryl said, "Ma'am, it's Daryl Parker," as if that explains anything for this woman in Dallas. "What do you want?" "We're looking for Jimmy Cotton." The door opens, there's Jimmy. We sit down. I've thought very carefully about how to navigate this, because I didn't want to spook him, right? He was now 48 years old. Didn't want to spook him, didn't want to kind of upset him. So I just kind of began, I asked like the first question, like, tell me about that night. What do you know? And who, were you a senior in high school, blah, blah, blah. And he blurts out, "I'm not sure I saw Ben. I don't know if it was him. I never saw his face." It was basically a confession, a confessional. He was recanting his entire testimony 30 years after the fact. We had it on tape because I was doing it for NPR as well. And so he recanted. He offered to sign an affidavit, take a polygraph, which he did, passed with flying colors. And then we found the jailhouse snitch. And Danny Edwards, we went to one house we thought he might be at. There were 8 families living in that house, and everyone said they didn't know him. And so Daryl and I were about to drive away in the Jeep when we see this young woman raising her hand at us from across the street. And we went over there, and she said, "Are you looking for Danny Edwards?" And we said, "Yes, why, we are." And she said, "Well, he's my fiance. And do you want his cell phone number?" This is another lesson, folks. Show up. Just show up. It's true with lawyers, it's true with investigators, it's true with reporters, it's true in life. Just show up. So we showed up, and he was out at work that night, but he came in, and the next morning we met up with him, and so Danny, did Ben actually confess to you? "Nah, he didn't confess to me. No, this is the way the game is played." He had been facing a 25-year sentence. He walked out of prison 2 months after Ben's second trial. So he got a very short sentence. He got a deal. And he said, "No, this is what we do. It's how you get a shorter sentence." So with that, all that, we felt, and we found another alibi witness. Took us a while to find him, but who was with Ben at the time of the assault, several miles away. So with those 3 pieces of information, we had a lot more hope. Now, of course, I as a journalist couldn't do anything about it, and this is actually why I want to talk to you guys. And if we have time at the end, I'll give you my pitch for why you need to think about these things. But as a journalist, the piece ran in NPR, it ran in The Atlantic, and then nothing happened. Why? Because an article doesn't have any legal weight to it. It didn't get us back into court. And so that's why it's really important why it was important for us to get this material to the new DA who was elected, and he took it and ran with it. So it was the most meaningful thing I've ever been able to do, but it's also hugely satisfying to be able to work on the side of angels and see it actually come to fruition.
Now, before we get to 2018, one of the pieces of your book that is striking is how Ben's case, with the lack of DNA evidence at all, one way or the other, really complicated the effort, and how much of the innocence work is focused on the DNA work because it's so binary and dispositive in a way that this case is not. So I wonder if you'd say a word or two about that.
Yeah, no, that's true. So the first DNA exoneration was in 1989. Ben was convicted in 1987 and 88. They didn't know even to collect DNA, right? They didn't know it was a thing. And so it appeared that there might be DNA in the evidence if only we could find the evidence. I mean, DNA lasts forever, right? If you can find the evidence, maybe we'll find that that there was some of Michael Hubbard's, who we thought did the murder, maybe his DNA there, or someone else's on the evidence. But because the DNA did 2 things, one great and one not so great. DNA showed us incontestably that the system is broken, because you can say everything, we had witnesses and we had hair evidence or some other kind of junk science. We had a confession. We had all these things. And yet you can look back and go, wait a minute, DNA shows that they got it completely wrong, right? So that's what DNA did. The scales fell off of our eyes, and we could suddenly see that the system's broken. The bad thing that it did is it made everyone expect, it made juries and also, the public kind of expect that there will always be DNA evidence. And you know what, if there's not DNA to exonerate you, then, well, sorry, there's a little bit of gray area here. And we don't know if you're actually innocent because there's no DNA. And so we're just going to let you cool your heels in prison for the rest of your life. So that's what happened, and that was the case with Ben. There was no DNA. And so there was a gray area. How can you prove a negative, right? And so DNA has been both good and bad. And what I would say is, going forward, we've basically run out of all the old cases of untested DNA. We don't have those anymore. So everything from now on will be the kind of gumshoe investigation that we had to do in Ben's case, because there won't be an easy, there's DNA exonerating him.
So we'll turn to 2018 in a moment, which is a pivotal intervention with the prosecutor in Dallas. Before we do, though, Ben, tell us about Deborah.
So I'm convicted, sent off to prison for life, and trying to adjust myself to the new life that is before me in prison. And I really thought it was unfair for her to be confined in our marriage to me, who is incarcerated. So I didn't think that I know that I couldn't perform the duties I have as a husband. I couldn't provide for her. I couldn't be a father to my son. And so several years into my incarceration, I began to encourage her to go on with her life. I thought it was important for her to go on with her life to find the happiness that I thought she deserved, that I knew that I couldn't give her because of my circumstances. And so we kind of parted our ways eventually because she kind of fought me on it to begin with, kept telling me, no, I don't want a divorce, I don't want a divorce. And then eventually, I think she bought into this idea that I was sharing with her that, you know, she deserved to be happy. And so we divorced, but we remained, even after divorcing, we remained friends. We continued to communicate through letters. And later on in years, when they put phones into the system, we would talk over the phone. So we remained a part of each other's life because we still were important to each other, not only to each other, but we also we shared a child. So it was important for us to have some type of relationship. And
Can I add something here? He is being way too shy in the sense that I've read 2,000 pages of Ben's letters to Deborah. Her letters to him were basically lost, but I've read 2,000 letters, and Deborah was his most constant friend, and you were madly in love with her, okay? He's not saying that. So for years, Deborah was his most constant friend, was his lifeline. And as we got to the evidentiary hearing and all of that, their hopes rose that they might be able, that Ben would be freed. And after the Court of Criminal Appeals said no, Deborah was still there. And I mean, what I need to say about Ben is I have read all these letters and I've never seen a bitter letter. I've never seen one where he was angry. I've seen where he was discouraged. When he wouldn't get parole, for example, year after year after year. But I never saw anything but incredible affection and love for both Deborah and BJ. And so he is being way too modest, but they have a great relationship, and she waited.
And I can admit that, yes, I do love her. However, to me, it was just important for, you know, it was a bittersweet thing because I wanted her to be happy, but at the same time, I wanted to be a part of that happiness that she found. I just found it hard to be a part of that happiness in the circumstance and situation I was in. So, yeah.
So 2018, we have Centurion Ministries has come along. People are investigating your case. People believe in your innocence. There's new evidence. There's Barb's Atlantic article, and still nothing. And then maybe Barb, tell us about the change in the prosecutor in Dallas and what that meant.
Right. So one of the kind of wonderful things and disturbing things, wonderful things about his case and disturbing about so many others is the role of serendipity. That, you know, Ben was lucky because 4 prosecutors before this new prosecutor, John Creuzot, was elected in 2018, 4 prosecutors had denied reopening the case, even though they were presented with evidence of Ben's innocence. And so this man, John Creuzot, was elected. He was a former judge, also a former prosecutor, a Democrat, a black man, understood that especially black men are wrongfully convicted regularly. And so I called him up and said, have you heard about the Ben Spencer case? And he said, yes, but it's already been to the Court of Criminal Appeals, the High Court. They've turned down his innocence. I don't think I can go there again. And I said, well, do you think, can I just send you the article that I wrote and, what I didn't know? And he said, sure. What I didn't know is that a friend of his is another piece of serendipity. They brought on a new lawyer who knew, Gary Udishin, who knew the prosecutor. So that's another bit of serendipity. And what happened is this prosecutor looked at everything, assigned it to a woman named Cynthia Garza. Cynthia Garza headed a unit called the Conviction Integrity Unit. Has anyone ever heard of those? Okay, this is the coolest thing, and you should get a job doing this. It's an office within the prosecutor's office that reinvestigates questionable convictions. And CIUs, they're all over the country now. Dallas was the first one. They are now responsible for more than half of the exonerations. It's when prosecutors take a look and they can get stuff that defense attorneys can't, reporters can't. They can look in the files. And that's what Cynthia did. And she found evidence in the files, in their own files, that Gladys Oliver had received between $5,000 and $10,000 in reward money, had lied at it at the trial, that there was virtually no evidence against Ben, convicting Ben, and they just drilled way down. They found that Danny Edwards had been lying. They confirmed that, all this stuff, and it's because of that. It's because of the prosecutor and his openness to Ben's case, much more than media attention, that Ben was given a second chance at life.
And I could attest to that because the person who was in office who started the Conviction Integrity Unit, his name was Craig Watkins. And if not for what Craig Watkins started, which was the Conviction Integrity Unit, they wouldn't exist anywhere in this nation today. And now they're pretty much everywhere. But for whatever reason, Craig Watkins was unopen to hearing or listening to anything regarding my case. And we believe it has something to do with Ross Perot and him not wanting to offend him in any way by looking into this case and giving it the attention that it deserved. The DAs who took office after him would not look at it, would not take a look nor interest in it until John Creuzot. So I have to give a lot of credit to him as well, because when the Conviction Integrity Unit began to look at this case with fresh eyes, and what they pretty much essentially do is they begin to look at the case as if it had just happened, and they review it and see where the evidence leads them. And so they came on board and pretty much agree with everything that was presented, as well as finding evidence that supported the fact that I was wrongfully convicted. So, yes.
And then finally, in 2021, you're freed, you're released. Talk about that moment.
So in 2021, I'm in a jail cell talking to Deborah on the phone, and we had been waiting on this judge to sign this order so I could be released, possibly on a PR bond. But there was a lot of stuff going on, COVID, this winter storm they had just experienced, and then her mother passed away. And so I'm talking to Deborah on the phone, and she's said, well, and this judge had said she was going to hold a hearing the following week. So that's what we were expecting, the hearing to take place the following week. And so Deborah's on the phone, and she said, well, since nothing's going to happen this week, I'm just going to go to Houston with my friends. I said, okay, just have fun, And while we're talking, this guard comes to the door and tell me, hey, they need to take you upstairs to sign some papers. So I'm like, okay. And so she's like, rush me. I say, hey, I got to get off the phone. They want me to go sign some paper. And Deborah's trying to holler through the phone, telling me not to sign anything. And I say, I got to go. I hang up the phone, and they rush me out. And Jim McCluskey's trying to call Deborah, so she calls him, and I'm rushed upstairs, and so Jim she's telling her, they're trying to get Ben to sign some paper. I'm telling him not to sign. He said, well, that's what I was trying to call you about. You need to, drop what you're doing, and you need to get downtown to the courthouse. The judge is going to hold a hearing. I mean, she did this out of the blue. We didn't expect it. And so she holds this hearing, and she tells me that she's going to release me on a personal recognizance bond while we'll wait to see what the Court of Criminal Appeals does in the case. So within 45 minutes of her telling me that, I'm walking out the front door of the Dallas County Jail. Yeah, a free man, and it's, essentially free, not free, but free, So I walk out to media, a host of people who are there celebrating with me, guards who have left their post at the jailhouse who are out there taking pictures, you know, and they're all excited for whatever reason. But it was an exciting moment. Yeah.
And give us the Deborah update.
Oh, so Deborah and I, we try to pick up where we left off and reconnect and reestablish our relationship. And I was released March 12th, 2021. We were married January 10th, 1987.
2022, the next year.
Wait a minute.
You said,
I'm
oh,
telling the
you're the
story.
first time. Oh, I stand corrected, sorry. Sorry.
So we were married initially January 10th, 1987. So January 10th, 2022, we remarried and re-began our relationship as husband and wife, which was an exciting moment. A lot of people were there to celebrate with us, and it was real special. You know? Yeah.
We're coming close to time. I want to give each of you one last word, knowing that you're in front of a room of largely law students, and you know this is a pretty unique opportunity for them to hear your stories collectively and what they represent. So a parting word or thought for this audience. Barb, start with you.
Yeah, I kind of teased this earlier that I'm really glad to talk with, to see a bunch of future lawyers, future prosecutors, future legislators, future defense attorneys in this room, because you guys can actually fix the system. The system is actually getting better. Texas, believe it or not, is the most progressive state when it comes to both avoiding wrongful convictions, I think because they execute people, so they don't want to get it wrong, but also giving people access to the courts once they're convicted. So not every state can be as progressive as Texas, it turns out. But other states need to come forward, and legislators need to be on the case. Prosecutors need to be knowing about the pitfalls of tunnel vision when you focus on one person, on the unreliability of eyewitness testimony, the unreliability of jailhouse snitches. You know, to kind of go suppress the instinct that if you think this person is guilty, it doesn't matter if you don't give them all the evidence, you know, because they're guilty, and so I don't want to gum up my prosecution. You know, that's called Brady material, right? So if you guys can actually do something about this, you can be a John Crusoe and think carefully about everyone you prosecute or dubious convictions. And that's why I'm really happy to be here today and appreciate your attention.
Ed?
I'm excited as well to be before you, pretty much for the same reason that Barb is. Occasionally I get a chance to talk to law students at my attorney's law school, and one of the things I like to encourage people who are pursuing this field as both defense attorneys, prosecutors, is that you have a duty to perform. If that duty falls to be a prosecutor, then take the duty and the job seriously. What I mean by that is, too often as prosecutors or district attorneys, I think the ideal has been lost where they believe that it's their job to seek a conviction, but it's not. Your job as a prosecutor is to seek the truth and to seek justice. If you seek the truth and seek justice, then justice will truly prevail in the end. But if you just go on a whim and just say, well, you know, I'm just seeking a conviction, which a lot of prosecutors do, you know, they become theatrical, and a lot of times get conviction based on they perform the best, you know, as an actor, so to speak. Never fall into that. Never fall into that. But do your job as a prosecutor. Seek the truth. The truth will prevail. The truth is always there. You just have to be willing to have an open eye to see it. And as a defense attorney, I would encourage you to, you know, sometimes clients are guilty. And as a defense attorney, you have to advise them accordingly, you know. Just be the best representation of a defense attorney you can be in representing a person, you know. If they tell you they're innocent of the offense by which they're charged, take them up on it. Pursue the truth. In the end, you'll be able to better advise them after you sought the truth out. And that's what I would encourage you to do.
You want to hear more from Ben and Barb tonight at 7 o'clock at One Family Church on the Loop. They're going to be sharing more of the faith dimensions of their story, among other things. Please join me in thanking Barb and Ben today.